What is unit testing? Well, it's a very subjective opinion. It depends on what is a unit, what you consider as a unit, right? Very generic term is unit is a small piece of code. It can be a small function or a class. So will the developers write tests for each function? Maybe not. Will they write tests for each class? Maybe not. Sometimes most of the unit test will focusing on how this class behaves for different purposes, or they will be writing unit tests for specific endpoint by mocking everything else. So where this endpoint gets input from, where it stores, where it sends this information to, all this information is pretty much mocked, and then they write specific test for that endpoint that okay, I send this data and it should return this kind of value. So this specific endpoint, you might think it as an integrated test, but when it is everything else is mocked, that becomes a unit test because it only checks how this endpoint works. So the endpoint can have maybe one function, maybe one class, maybe multiple classes are integrated within this unit. So based on defining how you are defining unit test, that also how do you define a unit defines what is a unit test. So depends on your definition of an unit. The unit test might have one endpoint, one function, one class, or multiple functions, multiple classes, etc. And there is a common thing is like unit test is written by developers. That is mostly true. Mostly true when most of the developers, they already have a unit test, and then when they change a function, write a new class, they duplicate the existing unit test and they create new unit tests based on this idea. From that context, it makes sense the developer need to write unit test. But in some cases, when you have an automation suite which does all these things without mocking, then it's an integration test, but they don't need to write this unit test. So you test this specific unit with integrated level. That can also be an unit test of specific endpoint, specific validation, specific response, and stuff like that. So it depends on what you define it as a unit, what you test it out of that unit, right? So as usual, any testing will have three parts of it: arrange, act, and assert. So maybe you arrange it in a way that everything else is mocked, then it's an and act it as a sending the information, and assert it based on what is the information returning back. That's pretty much covers what is a unit test. So again, define what is a unit, and then based on that, how you write, where you write, who write the unit test, all can differ.